Okay, today is August 21st, 2013. I'm Deborah Polsky, and I am here interviewing Harv Weisblat at the JCC of Dallas. So tell me a little bit about your background. Are you a native Dallasite?
Born in Dallas in 1945
Okay.
at the old St. Paul Hospital over not too far from the current Baylor. That's subsequently been torn down, and of course St. Paul was rebuilt over by Parkland. It's part of the hospital complex over there now. So
How did your family come to Dallas?
well, my mom's from Omaha, Nebraska, and my dad is from Coshocton, Ohio. And I guess we can go back and how they got to those locations.
Yeah, absolutely.
On my mom's side, very interesting. Actually, my dad's side came over first. There were three brothers, and they all came over from Belarus, the area far northern Germany. It looks like that's where we traced them back to. And they came over right around the turn of the century, just after a year or so, one at a time, and they settled in Coshocton, Ohio. We're in a scrap business, opened up a little scrap business there. But Coshocton is not much going on in Coshocton. So when my dad was born, he was the youngest of five. He ended up, well, actually, when he was 8, my grandmother, died, and when he was 18, my grandfather died.
Okay.
So he, actually a couple of years after that, so he moved to Cleveland, which was about 80 miles away, the big city. And from Cleveland, he moved out to Los Angeles, where he had an uncle that had a little business there.
Mm-hmm.
And he went into business with his uncle, actually working for his uncle. His uncle wisely, I guess, made him sign a non-compete agreement that if he ever quit working for him, he would not be able to go into business anywhere west of the Rocky Mountains.
Wow.
So
what kind of business was it?
it was a business making shoe bags, the fabric shoe bags that you hang on the inside of your closet door. And that's what he was doing at that. And he was traveling California. And then he met my mom at an AZA convention. She came from Omaha. She's the youngest of 3 siblings. My grandfather, interesting how they got to Omaha. My grandfather was an apprentice in my great-grandfather's butcher shop just outside of Kiev, a region called Babi-Yar, which, as you know, is a pretty famous region at this point. Not good, but not a positive image. But at that time, it was pre-slaughter. So he was drafted, as you know, in the Russian Army. The firstborn son does not have to go to the Army, but any sons after that do go to the Army, and that's why the Jewish families, especially if there was a second son born, they would trade their son off to other families that had no son.
Right.
And that's why it's so hard to trace genetically back. But he was drafted actually he went to work for my great-grandfather in his butcher shop as an apprentice. My great-grandfather had 4 daughters, one of which was my grandmother. When she was 18, and he was just coming back from basic training, being drafted. And as you know, being drafted was almost a death sentence back then. They had to serve 10 years in the Army, fighting the Tsar's wars in Siberia, wherever.
Mm-hmm.
So my grandfather decided that evidently they met and they liked each other. So my grandfather decided that he would secretly book passage of this apprentice that worked in his butcher shop, and his daughter, who was 18 at the time. And when he came back, he only had 2 days or 3 days, whatever it was, he put my grandfather and my grandmother on board a ship down to the Black Sea. Then they went from the Black Sea over to England, and from England to New York. And of course, he was AWOL from the Russian army, so we don't know what ramifications came out of that with his family. So she's 18. It's still unclear whether they were married because it was such a rushed situation, or they got married on the ship, or the captain, or it was still unclear how. But anyway, they came over. It was in, of course, they couldn't afford much, so they came over in steerage.
Right.
And my grandmother got very, very ill. They didn't know if she was going to make it, in fact, coming over on the ship, but she survived. And they hit New York. They can't speak English. They can't do anything. They have a relative in the Lower East Side, but when they're going through Ellis Island, they ask him through an interpreter what his name was, and evidently the interpreter thought it was, asked him where they were from, and they said Babiar. We're from Babiar. So their name became Babior instead of the way you spell Babiar.
Right.
So their name was now Babier. But they also asked him what he did. And he said he worked in a butcher shop. And he said, well, we have a job for you, but it's in Omaha, Nebraska. So we're going to put you on a train to Omaha, Nebraska. And of course, he couldn't afford to take his new bride with him. So she stayed not even be able to speak English. She stayed in New York, Lower East Side, with a distant relative. It took about almost a year, a little less than a year. He went out and worked in the reason it was Omaha is because the trail drives came to Omaha at that time, and the railhead was in Omaha. The Swift and Armour and all those other rendering plants put meat in refrigerated cars and shipped them back east. So he had his job there in a plant. I think it was for Armour. So he saved up enough money, sent her the money. They got a train ticket. She took the train out to Omaha, and they were finally reunited after about a year. In the meantime, she was learning a little bit of English. She always spoke with an accent. I never met my grandfather because he died before I was born.
Oh, really? Mm-hmm.
But so they started a life in Omaha, Nebraska, and they had 3 children. And my mom was the youngest, seemed to be always the apple of my grandfather's eye. And
what was her name?
Her name was Ida Babier. And my dad's name was David Weisblat. Anyway, at 18, she decided that she had a cousin living in Los Angeles. So they went out. So she decided that she wanted to go to Los Angeles. So she went to Los Angeles, got a job. She went to secretarial school for a year, then got a job in Los Angeles, and then my dad and my mom met at an AZA convention in Los Angeles, or at the beach, I'm not sure. At that time, Los Angeles was a little community about 8 miles inland from the beach. And in order to get to the beach, you had to take a trolley through the bean fields. There was nothing between Los Angeles and the beach. And it was paradise, of course. They loved it out there. Anyway, he was working for his uncle, which was not a problem when they weren't married and they weren't even dating and hadn't even met yet. He traveled all up and down California selling for my uncle, who ran his factory in Los Angeles. And but after he met my mom and they got married, he didn't want to travel anymore, or at least he wanted to travel less. And my uncle said, "No, you have to continue to travel." So they had a disagreement, and they decided to get married. My folks decided to get married, and he left my uncle, and the only thing he knew how to do was this business, But he decided that he wanted to go into business for himself, making these shoe bags, so he had to do it somewhere else. So they hopped on a train, and they came through Las Vegas, which was nothing at the time, through
Right.
Phoenix, which was nothing, Tucson, nothing, El Paso, nothing. And then they came all the way, the train let them off in Dallas, and that was the first decent community with a decent Jewish population. I think at the time there was 2,000 or 3,000 was the Jewish population at the time. They got off the train and got a garage apartment in the back of a home that was owned by a family named Golden. Golden was in the pickle business.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if you remember Golden Pickles or not.
I've heard of it.
Anyway, they lived it for a while up in the garage, and they started a little small little business. And he traveled Texas, and he went to all the mom and pop dry goods stores on the squares in all these little towns,
Right.
and most of them were Jewish owned, and so he was able to sell, and he'd come home on the weekends. They'd make the stuff and ship it off. Anyway, that's how he got his start, and from there they built a family. I had a sister and a brother. I'm the youngest of the three, and my brother is out in Los Angeles. My sister married she went to University of Arizona and married a fellow that she met out there, and they stayed out in Arizona. But when she had twins and an older daughter, and when her older daughter was 4 and her twins were 2, she actually a little before that she developed leukemia, and she passed away when they were 4 and 2. So my brother's still well, and he's out in San Diego. And in the meantime, it gets back to where I am. I grew up here, went to school here.
What part of Dallas did you
we-
grow up in?
Actually, we had a house when I was up till I was about 6 years old, near SMU, which was really not even in Dallas. It was out from Dallas at the
Right.
time. It was starting to build up out that way, on a street called Potomac, which was 2 streets north of Mockingbird, just off of Hillcrest, and they were about 2 blocks from the small little campus called SMU. And then in 1951, there was a new development being developed out near Walnut Hill, and they went ahead. By that time, he was saved up some money. Since I was the youngest, I was 6. My brother was 16, and my sister was 13 at the time. So they moved out to a house on Stephanie, just one house off of Stephanie and Thackeray, about a block from Hillcrest. So I went to school in that area. Went to Hillcrest High School, and from there went to University of Texas.
What was it like growing up as a Jewish kid?
Well,
living.
It was very
in that area
interesting.
especially.
We really had. It was a wonderful time to grow up in the 50s. We would, at 10 years old, we would ride. There was no movie theaters. There was no suburban shopping centers. Everything was downtown Dallas. In downtown. And downtown Dallas wasn't, what it is today, but it was.
Right.
But it had the department stores, it had the movie theaters, it had the restaurants. There was just really nothing. So as a kid, everything was safe. We would ride at 10 years old, get a buddy, and I'd ride the bus downtown, go to the show, go out to Jimmy's Chili Rice and eat or hot dogs, and then get on the bus and ride the bus home again. We do it by ourselves, without, you wouldn't do that today with your kids, but we could do that. Then from a Jewish standpoint, We belonged to Sheriff Israel at the time, which my first Sunday school was in Oak Cliff before they built before they built their campus out on Douglas, or their building out on Douglas, out north. And then, which happened, I think I went for 1 or 2 years. We'd go to Preston Center, which was just kind of a crossing there, where it wasn't much there. And we'd catch the bus. The bus would take us to Oak Cliff every, especially while they were building Sheriff Israel. And so it was interesting, the people that I met, the names that I remember. I was just standing out front looking at the board of all the contributors to the J here, and it was a trip down memory lane with all those names, from my childhood, all the people in the community at the time. And there was a sense of community that we had growing up. Everybody, all the parents were struggling and just starting to do well in their jobs, businesses, and careers. And we were the legacy, basically, of that. Going up through high school at Hillcrest, in Reuben Kaplan AZA, went up through, bar mitzvah, confirmed, AZA, sports activities, BBG,
So you were involved in the Jewish community?
Completely.
Were your parents involved?
Yes, they were, pretty much. My mom was pretty much a stay-at-home mom, but Dad helped out with the ADL, which was a brand new budding organization for a regional chapter in Dallas at the time, and he was involved in the synagogue and a couple of other organizations at the time. He got involved in the JCC here, especially when they had the rebuild in 1979. He was involved in the initial phases of that. Now, he passed away very young. He passed away when he was 64 in 1974. So he didn't get a chance to complete his involvement with the rebuild of the JCC at the time. And so by that time I had come back out of the service, and I stepped in, and we stepped up to the plate and fulfilled his commitment to the JCC in 1979. And subsequent to that, we have also continued to support the J and various Jewish organizations in the community, one of which, of course, is the Historical Society.
Absolutely.
And let's see where we stand here now.
So growing up in Dallas was
grew up in Dallas.
delightful.
It was wonderful. I mean, it was a new time. Everything was new. All the houses, were new. The shopping centers were expanding. About the time that I went off to college, they opened the first mall, and that was North Park Mall in '63, I think that was. So there weren't any malls, but I can remember going to Phil's Delicatessen after a date and going to a show, and everybody was at Phil's. Everybody showed up at Phil's all the Jewish kids would go there after their dates and everything. It was quite enjoyable. We had a great time.
So then you went to UT.
Went down to University of Texas,
Okay.
Pledged a fraternity down there, and went through 4 years of school. I need to backtrack just a little bit.
Sure.
Growing up, I really enjoyed making model airplanes and remote control and flying wire motorized little aircraft, and so I got pretty heavily involved in that as a hobby. When I went to UT, against my parents' wishes and demands, by the way, there was a physics professor who started a flying club. They bought several small airplanes, which you could rent relatively inexpensively at the time. And he taught the ground school, and so I took that unbeknownst to my parents. And I went ahead and got my pilot's license. I had to work myself because, of course, my parents were no way they would finance anything like that.
Right.
So I got a job when I was in school, and most of my money went toward that. Anyway, so I was involved in aviation to some extent at that point. As we progressed through college, we would come back to the fraternity house on Friday afternoons and turn on the TV while drinking a beer or two.
Right.
And Vietnam was going on. It was the first televised war, 66, 67, which I graduated in 67. So we had college deferments. The draft was initiated,
Right.
and we had college deferments that would go until you graduated or were able to continue your deferment, which was they weren't offering many continued deferments. You could continue deferments. Medical school, if you signed up, went in the Army, and
Right.
after, or Air Force, wherever they assigned you. But my deferment was going to be over, and when I graduated, and we were going to get, by September, if I didn't have a continued deferment, we were going to get that greetings letter. So, as dumb as we were back then, we knew that the first televised war ever, you knew you didn't want to be in the jungles, being, stepping on bungees and being sniped at. So I volunteered to go into the Air Force. Actually, I went down to the recruiter, took a bunch of tests, and since I had an aviation background and an aptitude for it, evidently, I passed all the tests, and they said enlist. I said, come on. And so I enlisted in the Air Force, and it was at that time when I told my folks what happened. They were pretty glad that I wasn't going in the Army, so they were fairly happy that, in spite of their insistence not to get involved in aviation, that I was involved in what I needed to do. But they were still concerned, of course,
Right.
because it was a military situation. And as a sidelight, it was interesting. About a week after I enlisted, I got a draft notification from the Army. And so I took it down to the recruiter, and I said, what do I do with this? And he grabbed it, and he says, here, I'll take care of that for you. So it was close. It was
Yeah.
real close. And so after being in the Air Force for a period of time, for training and going through the rigors of flight school and officer school and officer
Where
OCS.
did you do your training?
I did my initial training in OCS in Lackland, and did my undergraduate pilot training at Craig Air Force Base in Selma, Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting time to arrive in Selma, Alabama. It was just after the march across the Pettus Bridge.
Across the bridge.
I got there maybe 3 months after the march, or 4 months after the march, to start my year of training. It was quite interesting. I enjoyed in Selma, Alabama. There was a small but involved Jewish community.
Mm-hmm.
Again, that was still before Walmarts and everything, so you still had the mom and pop stores in the square, and so I met quite a few of the Jewish community there. Although I really wasn't, I was just too busy to get too involved in that thing. The life was completely different. And so I graduated in 1969, in mid-1969. Was in the Air Force on active duty for some time, and then transferred back into an Air Guard unit here at Navy Dallas in Grand Prairie, which was very interesting.
Wow.
I could have been assigned just about anywhere But in order to do that, you had to extend your enlistment, extend your contract, which I gladly did to get back here, because at that time my dad had already had acquired an illness and he was not well. He was managing it, but he was not well. This was in like 1971, 71, 72. Mm-hmm. And so I came back here and was in the Air Guard. And I stayed in the Air Guard for over 20 more years, and actually retired out of the Air Guard.
Oh, really?
So it was quite enjoyable. It was totally different than being in the Air Force, and you know, it was a camaraderie. It was a group. It pretty much stayed fairly, you know, pretty much the same people. So, but backing up, my dad was in the. He was not well. I went to try to help him out, to try to work with him. Mm-hmm. That was not to be. My heart was, you know, off in the sky, right, so to speak. Right. And then, of course, when he passed away in '74, which was about 2 years later, I pretty much had to come back. But at that time, my life was pretty well set. I went ahead and got my real estate license through salesman at first for a couple of years, and then with an individual that I had met a few years earlier, then a broker's license. But I didn't actually go out and sell real estate. I was involved more in putting together partnerships and finding properties for various partners in the community, names, some of which are on the board outside there.
How did you get interested in real estate? I mean, you were interested in aviation, and you were doing. Yeah.
Well, when my dad passed away, he had his office in a building, mm-hmm, in his little plant in a building, right? And he owned that building, so. So it just kind of took off from there. We inherited that one small building, and from there we went to other areas. You know, primarily warehouse properties, freestanding warehouse properties. That time, Brook Hollow was like a brand new development, or a fairly new development, right, and that's where we were, mainly in the Brook Hollow area, and so. And I was involved with other partners as well. And then as you get involved, you know, they know who your family is, they know who you are, they want to be involved. At that time, people needed real estate in their investment portfolio because of the terrible inflation, right, that the government brought on with the war on poverty, starting with the war on poverty in '64, which hasn't cured the poverty, but it's just the same percentages back then or more. And then Vietnam, we devalued the dollar greatly back then, and it reflected in the easiest thing for our politicians to do was to let inflation cure the scenario. So people needed real estate in their portfolio because that's where they protected their assets. And back then, we were not as litigious a society, right, and so people could go in. We didn't even have to do limited partnerships. People could just be partners in the partnership, in their own name. Right. And so basically, I'm up through career politics, through the career, through the Air Force, through the reserves. But backing up just a little bit, when I was in college, I also met a gal, and we fell in love, and decided that we didn't decide to get married back then. We graduated college, and I went off into the Air Force. Well, she basically decided that I was the one, so she moved up here to Dallas, got a job. And when I came back off of active duty, she stayed here for 2 or 3 years. We corresponded, and when I came back out of the Air Force, you know, we picked up where we had left off in college, and just after my dad passed away, a few months after my dad passed away, we got married in 1974.
Okay.
So we were basically, she was a school teacher. She worked at various jobs just to get a job to come to Dallas, because she was from a small town down near Galveston.
Oh,
And
okay.
she went to the University of Texas also, of course. And we got married, and I was basically started into real estate. She started teaching. At that time, you needed a secretary, so she was teaching. So she had 1.5 jobs. She had a half a job being my secretary and a full-time job teaching.
Right.
Then I started in real estate, got into the reserves, and so I had basically 1.5 jobs. Or actually, the reserves was more like 3/4 of a job, because if you're on flight status, we did a lot of. We went all over the, in this particular thing, we were aerial refueling, and so we went all over the world to various locations, supporting out of the Pacific. We went into Europe, especially during Vietnam. We picked up the slack where the active duty had been reassigned.
Right.
And then we switched to airplanes, went in Central and South America, even over into Africa some. So so we went quite a few places. But anyway, I was gone quite a bit, and so we never had any kids. And then after about 16 years, after about 14 years, I got a job with an airline, Continental, out of Houston. They recruited me to come fly with them, and I knew I was going to get out of the reserves within a couple of years. So I said, "Oh, why not? I'll keep going here." So then I had basically, she had 1.5 jobs, and I had 2.5 jobs. So between us, we had 5 jobs, basically, So we were a mess. We were building up an estate, and then finally she decided that this just wasn't the life for her. She wanted to go back to her small town, and so she said, so we had an amicable separation, no kids, after 16 years.
Right.
And so for the next 8 years, I was single in the reserves with the airline, and enjoying a peaceful single life, but with no kids. And I met my wife at a Jewish singles convention in Virginia Beach, Virginia.
Yeah.
I went back to there because we used to stop there on the way back and forth to Europe, at some of the military installations there.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought it would be nice to go back and see Virginia Beach. It had been a while, so I met her, and in the meantime I retired out of the reserves. Actually, I retired out of the reserves before we got a divorce, because I thought that maybe if I took something off my plate, we could maybe try to save the marriage, but it wasn't to be. And so I met her at a Jewish singles convention. She had a daughter that was 6 years old at the time, 7, I think. And this was in the late 90s, and one thing led to the next, and I said, oh, maybe we ought to think about getting married. And she says, well, she had been married once before, and it was not pleasant, evidently. So she says, well, I want to come up and see if this is what we want. We've been doing long distance. Long distance is one thing, but so she moved up here. She moved to Dallas from Virginia. But I said, well, we got to be engaged if you're going to move in, and she did. She actually had a job with the Jewish Day School in Virginia. She was the comptroller of the Jewish Day School. So her daughter it was great. She went to work with her, and her daughter went to the school, and she was in the office. So that worked out very well, while they were there. But once they graduated here, once she just decided to move down here, her daughter had to, we put her daughter in Solomon Schechter at first, and didn't work out very well. Her daughter was kind of rebellious. We had taken her away from the life that she'd known, and nothing was going to please her, and nothing was going to work out. And so anyway, ultimately we ended up putting her back in public school, and ultimately I adopted her, and then now she's truly my daughter. I can tell you that. And
this is the daughter who's about to get married.
This is the daughter that's about to get married. So this is my second chapter in my life with her and with Jolene, and hopefully Jolene will come and also give her side of the story. And so this is where we are today. Been involved in the Jewish community here, even though I was gone quite a bit during a long period of time. I'd be away from home as much as 23, 24 days a month.
Wow.
Which is a lot.
That's a lot.
But in spite of that, or before, I really was that. When I was just in the reserves, I'd be gone maybe only on the weekends and a week or two at a time here and there. So I was able to be involved in the Federation and the campaign, but then when I got on with the airline, I was just gone too much to be involved in a whole lot of that. So I backed off a little bit, and then now I've retrenched a little bit, started coming back out here, involved in the local ADL board and a couple of other organizations, and of course we started many years ago. We started a little congregation. It was about 8 families at the time. With us was my first wife, called Near to Mid. It was out in Carrollton, and we were one of the original 8 founding families, which was interesting. But even that went by the wayside as I started not being here, traveling quite a bit. And so after we got married, Jolene and I got married, and I adopted my daughter after it took about 3 or 4 years for the daughter to really get acclimated and adjusted. We joined Temple Emmanuel. Near to Mid at the time was just too small for her. They didn't have the programs that Jolene wanted for her daughter. And so Jolene got actively involved, of course, in the Temple Sisterhood, got on the board over there. They've recently had a capital campaign. I've been on the capital campaign. So I've been getting more involved back in the Dallas Jewish community. But at the same time, we found a place in Arizona, in Scottsdale. And back when the downturn hit, we bought a house out there. And we go out there, now that I'm semi-retired, I go out there twice. We go out there for about 6 months a year during the winter. Right. And so now I'm involved out there a little bit. I'm a guest board member on the ADL, and nice. This year I think I'm going to be involved in the foundation out there. I was in the foundation here for 20 some odd years on the board. So we started it starting back in the early 80s. I'm going to go ahead and re-involve in the Arizona situation, because ultimately I think that's where we want to retire out to Arizona. We have no more family here. Our daughter is, of course, going to just got a job with Omni Hotels, opening up a brand new Omni in Nashville. So no telling where she's going to end up, because they move them around quite a bit. And of course, she'll be getting married to Jason, who she met on board her when she had contracts with Royal Caribbean Cruise Lines, and it'll be very interesting to see where we end up. But I think what we'll end up having is our retirement home out in Arizona, and we'll less and less. Of course, my folks are buried here at the old Sheriff Israel Cemetery, along with my sister. And we've had roots in the community. So it's, and I'll still be somewhat involved in,
Right, there's always
in the community
a
here.
tie there.
Yeah.
When you look back on your life, who would you say your role models or your heroes were?
Well, my life was actually two lives. My life was one inside the Jewish community,
Mm-hmm.
and then outside the Jewish community, because there's just not a whole lot of Jews in the career path that I took. There's a few, but
yeah, but you're right,
not
so
a whole
many.
lot.
Mhm.
In the aviation business, there were numerous. When I first got in, there were still a lot of these old World War II aviators. What they did was just phenomenal. They were larger than life.
Mhm.
You know, those were the role models that kept me going inside the Air Force and the Air Guard.
Right.
I mean, just one right after another, just too numerous to name. Just awesome people. Just what they did and
Mhm.
what they did to serve their country, even though a lot of it was because they really had fun doing it and enjoyed it. But
What sets the aviators apart from the regular soldiers?
Yeah, it's and I still have people that I associate with from when I was in the service.
Mhm.
The second life, of course, was inside the Jewish community here, and the people that were instrumental growing up, the Waldmans, the Glazers, the Mumfuses, the Bachs, the Cohens, Henry Cohen, and these were all people that I grew up, observing and seeing how they ran the community, interacted in the community, and those were kind of my focus group with inside the Jewish community. There's a lot of those names are
All over.
they're on the board out there, but they're gone now. So,
Yeah,
so
that's true.
it's a real trip down memory lane looking at that board.
If you could leave the next generation or the generation coming up with advice about life, about career, about family, what would you tell them?
Well, I'm highly concerned about what's going on in Washington today. The only advice I would have is that you're going to have to make it in spite of what the government does, not with the help of the government, because it's all gonna come down. We're probably going to have another, at some point, without a crystal ball, you don't know when, but another high inflation environment like we saw in the 70s.
Mhm.
Politicians can let the inflation do their work for them and not get blamed for it.
Right.
It's the government. You just cannot depend, nor trust the government, nor trust the people. Well, it's the people in the government. You just can't trust them. And so you're going to have to survive inside your own environment, prepare for your own retirement, make your own living, and just not depend on the government for very much at all.
How do you see, having grown up here and seeing the Jewish community then and the Jewish community now, and even, what you're seeing in Arizona, do you think it's changed significantly in terms of?
Oh, yes. Well, when I was growing up, there was still quite a bit of anti-Semitic attitude. So you had to depend on yourself. You had to circle the wagons,
Right.
so to speak, and do within your own community. To the extent that our grandfathers and our fathers have established organizations and developed community inroads. Jews have been much more accepted and tolerated inside the community. They're in every phase of society at this point. And as a result, the assimilation has taken a lot of Jews out of the Jewish community, basically. Intermarriage, it's just been a big change. To that extent, I think that we have been accepted in society in general. We have become victims of our own success. Okay.
Interesting.
And so the kids, the children growing up today, they don't need to think about Jewish institutions and Jewish, and what happened back then was that since Jews were not accepted for many years they had quotas in medical school, quotas in law school. Jews couldn't really get jobs in corporate America, so they had to start their own businesses.
Right.
Their own businesses became very successful. The successful entrepreneurs financed a lot of the Jewish institutions. Now, there are still some examples of that, but it's not as many as it used to be based upon the population, especially percentage-wise. And as a result, you might have a lot more lawyers or a lot more doctors, and they might be able to make a nice gift, but they don't make the mega gifts that these entrepreneurs used to make to help with the Jewish communities. Now, there's still some that can. There's still a few that can, but the feeling is not there. I don't think the feeling is not there. The understanding is not there of how we got here, and and the need to continue to support and foster this environment requires you have to tend to it like you tend to a garden. And if you don't, the Jews in Germany prior to World War II were highly involved in the society and the community there, and they thought nothing would happen.
Right.
You can't just take it for granted that it's going to be good here and nothing is going to happen. You've got to work at it every day. You've got to have organizations like AJC and the ADL and organizations like that. And this is why like the JCC struggles, and
Right.
it's all struggling. It's a different environment today, and I don't know if we're handing off a better environment.
Everybody.
I don't know if we're handing off a different environment today. A good environment for our children and our grandchildren. They're going to have to make it. They're going to have to face their own situations. I hope they never have to circle the wagons again, but who knows? All I know is that you just can't depend on the government. You have to depend on yourself, your own community, and be as independent as you possibly can.
Correct.
At the same time, working within the community, Jewish and non-Jewish.
Absolutely.
So,
Anything else you'd like to add?
not that I can think of right now.
Well, thank you so much. This was delightful.
Thank
We
you.
will.